We are so glad to have you here on Mental Health Hookup with Barbara Wilson. I'm your host, Jason Downs. And as always, this is a special broadcast here at KHTS, your hometown station, because mental health is important to us, and we believe it is important to the well-being of our community. Today is March 21st, and this is Women's History Month, and we want to celebrate our women and lift up our women, especially those who are struggling because of much of our mental health as people. This is my belief. Much of our mental health as people depends upon the mental health of our women. I'm sure you've heard Michelle Obama say, we know that the measure of any society is how it treats its women and girls, and that starts with education. So let's continue our mental health education today with Barbara Wilson. I'm so glad you've joined us here on Mental Health Hookup. Here's to your good health and good health for all. Mental Health Hookup is a nonprofit and is dedicated to providing clinical support to families affected by serious mental illness in the Santa Clarita Valley and beyond. Whatever mental health services you need, they can provide, or they will hook you up with someone who can. They should be your first and last stop for mental health in Santa Clarita. So if you or a member of your family or anyone you know is suffering from mental illness, reach out and make an appointment today at mentalhealthhookup.org or by calling 661-799-7994 to speak to a live agent 24 hours a day. You can set up an appointment with Barbara there. So once again, we're fortunate to have Barbara Wilson with us to take your calls, of course. Patty will be standing by to field anyone who calls in. So please do. We welcome it. 661-298-5487 is the number to call and speak to Barbara today. That's 661-298-5487. Barbara has a Master of Social Work degree and has worked as a licensed clinical therapist in the state of California for 50 years. Is it 50 plus now? Okay. So today's topic is women. We are in praise of women on the show today, and we are highlighting women's issues, concerns, support, and validation. What's on your mind today, Barbara?
Well, thank you for having me. And I think you kind of said it all. It is Women's History Month, and as a biological woman, there are people that think that means that it's anti-male, and that is not it. I am the mother of a son, so certainly we're not. To honor a woman does not mean you take away from men, but simply that there needed to be some formal recognition of the differences in access to resources that women many times face. I can just tell you when years ago, women were denied access to credit even if they were working full-time. And, just a lot of things were very different. So we have come some distance. We have come a long way, baby. Do we have farther to go? Yes, we do. We are one of the only countries on the planet that has not signed an international agreement called CEDAW. That's CEDAW, and it stands for something like the Committee to Against Discrimination. I forget exactly what it stands for. You can Google it. But we were just talking about against women and girl children, to provide them equal access. Many families in many cultures, including some of our own, for example, privilege educating the male children. They'll send them to college, but not the female children. They say, well, you're going to get married, so you don't need an education and all of that. So we do have a ways to go.
Speaking of mental health and in light of that, how do we go about validating and dealing with invalidation? I mean, you talked yesterday as we were planning the show about how women still struggle with feeling invalidated, even during Women's History Month.
There are many ways in which I think many times women have been so silenced. We talked, I think, a month or so ago about the importance of having voice. So sometimes people just need the space, a space, safe space, to be able to just say, ow, this hurts. It doesn't mean they want to overthrow the natural order of things. It just means that right now, in this particular situation, this is really uncomfortable and I don't see any options. Many times we know from therapy, actually, we know that if therapy was a product, it works so successfully so much of the time that it would be a top seller. And we always wonder, why doesn't everyone have access to therapy? Because we know that simply the process of talking out loud, verbalizing, getting the oxygen going through the lungs and the body, that when people talk out loud about what's troubling them, or maybe they're not even sure that this is a legitimate concern, that they begin to find their own solutions. It works. It absolutely works. So this is an important tool, and women find it in all kinds of ways. Like there used to be something centuries ago called bathhouses, and they were for women during the unclean period of the month. And so the men would not want to be around them, their husbands. And so the women, in order to cleanse themselves and to be acceptable to the man in their life, they had to go away to a different part of the community. And these women would then, they were in this one space, a tent or whatever, and they would talk about what was going on in their particular family tent. And, those spaces began to be very healing, so that women actually started to look forward to going so that they could talk to the other women and get a little
reminds me of a beautiful
feedback.
Book that I read called The Red Tent.
It is that. Yeah. That's exactly,
That's exactly what it was about. Ancient, Jewish tribes, I guess, in that instance. But yes, it was a sort of a sacred and special. They had their time with
But if the men had really known that they were enjoying it, I don't know if they would have continued.
Oh, no.
That's what we
do. You think so little of us? Come on. What in our history has led you to...
I tell you, when women get together for whatever reason, it seems to be threatening to...
Seems to make men uneasy, yes.
It makes them uneasy, yeah. They're like, oh, what are you guys talking about?
There's a little too much power consolidated in one place.
So, so the therapy process absolutely works, and it's not always called therapy. In fact, most of the time it probably isn't. It's probably, the girls' night out is really
so you're saying you can get some healthy validation even in those less
those
formal,
very
those
informal, my girlfriends, my besties. One of the things that nursing mothers I hear a lot of, one of the things that helps them to heal so much is when they have a night out with their girlfriends from breastfeeding. That they're not that they don't like breastfeeding, but simply that they need to have that space where nobody's attached to their body and using their body for, they want their whole body for themselves for 2 or 3 hours. They're like, yes, it's just my body for me. Oh my gosh. So, yeah. And of course, the lack of sleep that goes with that.
So you mentioned that therapy itself, if it were more validated than it currently is, that if it were a product on the shelf, it would be a bestseller kind of thing. What's standing in the way of that validation finally? I mean,
of course, it's stigma with a capital S, like in Sam. Yes, stigma is huge. Still, it is. I think the number one. I don't have research that I can quote, but I know that stigma is a big factor, huge factor, in whether or not people will seek mental health services. Funny thing, I went to assess a lady, 88-year-old lady, Saturday, and she's losing her sight. She's a very proud woman. She's always been a professional in charge, and she doesn't take kindly to losing her sight and maybe having to be dependent on other people. So she's not exactly happy about this. And I was there listening to her talk, and she said, she had a doctor dare to suggest that she should go into assisted living. And she said, I told her, why would you even think of something like that? I'll take care of myself. And so I asked her, you're going through a lot. You're losing potentially what's left of your vision. You've lost your partner of long years. Do you think you might be interested in a little therapy? She said, heck no. Like that. I mean, it was like instant. She said, I don't know where that came from, but I certainly don't have any mental health issues. Now, she is depressed, which is our number one form of mental illness in America. But this woman, who is a retired nurse that worked her whole life, college graduate, in her mind, she has no mental health problems. That's something for those people.
Is it still more of a generational
I don't
stigma
think so.
that you found?
I don't think so, because we're seeing suicides on the uptick. And certainly that's not a good sign of accessing mental health services. And we're seeing an uptick of suicide in young people. Here in Santa Clarita even. So it's very disturbing. In fact, that's one reason why that you just made me think. Mental Health Hookup is collaborating with some other organizations here in Santa Clarita. We're going to put on the first ever community mental health event at a park. So it'll be user-friendly. You can bring your kids. You can bring your dogs. And we want to get mental health out of the closet. And let's talk about it. And let's admit that we have mental health problems and we have mental health solutions.
And that it's normal.
And that it's normal and that we don't have to hide it and be ashamed of it. It's just part of life because it's a brain disorder, just like if you had. I just read an article last night in a newspaper. This woman was a mother and she was willing to give up custody of her child because she could not afford the level of care that her child needed. And the only way for her to do that, to get the child, to get the help the child needed, and it was a teenager, was for her to relinquish custody to the county or the state or something, and then the child would then belong to the state and they could have the funding. And she was describing how horrible that was. And just think of it. She had to love her child enough to turn her back on her child so that her child could get mental health treatment. How horrible is that?
I can't imagine being in that position.
Yeah.
But if your child needs something that badly and you can't provide it, then what do you do?
I get calls every 2 or 3 times a week from mothers that are desperately looking for resources for their family members. That's why Mental Health Hookup actually got started, was to help families find resources because there are so few. And if you have a school-age child, perhaps, keyword perhaps, the school district may collaborate with some other agencies to fund the necessary treatment. But once the child ages out, whether it's 18 or 21 or 26, it varies according to what's going on, eventually there's no more funding for that person, that child. And then what?
Or that, I guess, adult.
And then they're an adult, and, the school district, everybody's like, we're done.
So the event that you're holding is on May 14, correct?
Saturday morning, May 14th. We hope to have it at 10 o'clock so that it's not real hot. And yes, we want everybody to come out and speak your truth.
As far as, You talk about supporting each other and women supporting women, right? It could be something as simple as the girls' night out. Let's talk more about how women can be supportive of each other and their mental health, and I guess other things that you've come in contact with in your practice along those lines.
Well, one of the ways, of course, that women have traditionally done, if they have informal networks, whether it was through organized religions, those some kind of missionary group or those kinds of things. And of course, once you have children, if you have children, there are various structures that tend to bring mothers together, in particular, like PTA or something going on with the schools. So there are these various structures that are informal, or they are not mental health structures, but they do support the mental health of women in particular. And this takes me to thinking about stay-at-home moms, particularly since COVID. We have seen an uptick of professional women stepping away from careers that they'd worked very hard to achieve, and feeling that due to a lack of childcare or lack of consistency for their children, like maybe the school is open this week, then next week it's not open, and how can I hold a job like this? And so they end up feeling that they have to make the decision that they are stepping away from their career and becoming full-time moms. This is a very, very difficult decision for them to make. I see it in my own therapy practice. It's also difficult for us as a country. There are a lot of articles that are being written about the loss of skilled labor because women are going home, and then, of course, the strain on the marriage because maybe they bought their house based on both incomes,
yeah, sure.
And now they're only going to have one income. And then does that mean that the remaining worker now becomes a worker bee? I have one client that I'm seeing right now, and a lot of their issues are around the fact that their husband is working 80 hours, 90 hours a week, but not only does he feel, that he needs to work that, but also he says to me, she could work if she wanted to. She gets 2 or 3 hours a day off. I never get any day off. And when I'm off, I'm sleep. If I'm not sleeping, I'm working. So now he's developing a resentment about how much he's working.
This is pretty huge. I think I want to dive into this for the rest of the episode. Focus on mothers with school-age children, professionals with school-age children, and if anyone out there would like to call in and share your story, share your thoughts, any advice from Barbara, please do. 661-298-5487 is the studio line. Patty is standing by to take your calls. I know Barbara would love to speak to you. One thing before we take a break, I want to just double back to something you said a moment ago when we were talking about the stigma that people have about therapy in general still, not just mental illness. But you said that mental illness is a brain disorder. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
So that might be one of the reasons why there's a stigma, and perhaps you could explain a little bit more what you mean about a disorder, because when I hear that word, it sounds like something that's incurable. It sounds like something
it's the opposite
scary.
That makes it more curable.
Okay. Well, see, that's a perfect example. So a stigma that I have personally was triggered by that word disorder. So you're saying that clinically, if you call it a disorder, it means that it is curable.
It's like anything else. If you can have a brain disorder, you might have a blood disorder. You may have, not everything gets called The thinking of mental illness for so long, just to go a little bit historic, is through let's take my favorite, schizophrenia. The symptoms of schizophrenia have been around ever since we have recorded history. No matter the culture, no matter the country, it's always been there. So why is it we can send a man to the moon, on vacation even, but we have not even developed a blood test to say when an infant is born, we could test that infant and see is he at risk for schizophrenia?
And cure them of schizophrenia?
Well, right now, we don't cure it because we have not.
We haven't put the brain power.
You
the money
have
power
to put the money behind the research. See, we wanted to go to the moon, so we got to the moon.
Okay, so schizophrenia is on one end of the spectrum. What about something more common like depression? You're saying
depression has different levels,
but still curable in the sense
absolutely.
that okay,
absolutely. But depression has there are different types of depression, and so therefore what you're looking at, what you're treating is different. One of the things that really annoys me is when I hear somebody give advice to somebody that's depressed, and they'll say, oh, well, you just need to go get your exercise, and that'll build your endorphins, and then you're going to be, you'll have no more depression. And I'm just like, are you out of your mind? What kind of advice are you, no. If a person is clinically depressed, it's all they can do to get up and go to the bathroom. Tell them to go jog? Oh, you might as well tell them to go do neurosurgery without training. They can't do it.
All right,
but it can be treated. That's the difference. It can be treated, and they can get better, and they can regain control of their lives. That's the difference. As opposed to saying, well, they're just, they're depressed and we'll just write them off and send them out to the pasture to live until they die. That used to be kind of it.
We're talking to Barbara Wilson, licensed clinical social worker here for 50 years plus. If you'd like to talk to her, just call 661-298-5487. We welcome your calls. We'll be right back to talk about mothers of school-age children and professionals of school-age children just coming up. So stay with us right here on KHTS 98.1 FM and AM 1220.